The house had been in the family for 3 generations, but Emma had never spent more than a weekend there. Now, with her grandmother's passing and the executor's insistence that someone needed to sort through decades of accumulated belongings, she found herself standing in the musty foyer of the old Victorian. A ring of tarnished keys heavy in her palm. The October wind rattled the windows as she dragged her suitcase across the warped hardwood floors. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light that filtered through yellowed lace curtains. Everything smelled of lavender sachets and thyme, that particular scent of a house that had been lived in by the same person for 60 years. Emma had taken 2 weeks off from her job at the insurance firm, figuring that would be more than enough time to decide what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. The house would go on the market by Thanksgiving if she had her way. She'd never been sentimental about family heirlooms, and the monthly property taxes were already eating into her modest savings. She started in the kitchen, sorting through cabinets filled with mismatched china and mason jars that hadn't been opened since the Carter administration. The refrigerator hummed with an irregular wheeze that made her wonder about the electrical system. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap against the kitchen window, and she was grateful she'd arrived before the storm that had been threatening all afternoon. By evening, she'd made decent progress on the first floor. Boxes of worthless knickknacks sat by the front door, ready for donation pickup. She'd found some jewelry that might be worth appraising, and a few family photographs she thought her cousin might want. The work was tedious but not unpleasant, accompanied by the steady rhythm of rain that had begun in earnest around 6 o'clock. It was while she was heating a can of soup for dinner that she heard it for the first time, a soft scratching sound that seemed to come from somewhere beneath her feet. She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth, and listened. The old house was full of settling sounds, creaking wood and whispers of wind through gaps in the siding. This was different though, deliberate, like something being dragged across a rough surface. She waited, but the sound didn't repeat. Probably mice, she told herself. Old houses always had mice. The basement had been off limits when she was a child. Her grandmother had claimed the stairs were too steep, too dangerous for little legs. Even as a teenager, she'd been discouraged from venturing down there. Nothing but junk and cobwebs, her grandmother would say with a wave of her hand. Nothing worth bothering with. Now, standing at the top of the narrow wooden stairs with a flashlight in her hand, Emma realized she'd never actually seen the basement. The bulb at the bottom of the stairwell had burned out years ago, and the flashlight beam revealed only the first few steps before disappearing into blackness. The scratching sound came again, clearer this time, definitely from below. She descended slowly, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. The stairs groaned under her feet, and the air grew noticeably colder with each step down. The smell changed too. Less lavender and dust, more earth and something else she couldn't identify. Something organic and unpleasant. The basement was larger than she'd expected, stretching beneath most of the house's footprint. Her flashlight beam swept across stone walls and a dirt floor, illuminating stacked boxes, an old coal furnace that hadn't been used in decades, and cobwebs so thick they looked like grey curtains hanging from the ceiling joists. Near the far wall, her light caught something that made her pause. Scratches in the dirt floor, long parallel grooves that looked fresh. She moved closer, kneeling to examine them. The marks were deep, carved with some force, and they led from the center of the room toward the wall where several boxes were stacked. "Just mice," she said aloud, her voice sounding small in the dank space. But even as she said it, she knew the marks were too large, too widely spaced to have been made by rodents. She was about to investigate further when the batteries in her flashlight died. The darkness was absolute, not the gray darkness of a cloudy night, but the complete absence of light that only existed underground. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone, using its small LED light to navigate back to the stairs. The thin beam barely penetrated the gloom, but it was enough to guide her back to the kitchen. She made a mental note to buy batteries in the morning. That night, she lay in her grandmother's old bed, listening to the rain against the windows and the house settling around her. Every creak and groan seemed amplified in the dark. Twice she thought she heard the scratching sound again, but when she sat up to listen more carefully, there was only silence. She finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning, her dreams filled with vague images of things moving in dark spaces beneath her feet. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, with the kind of penetrating dampness that made everything feel cold and clammy. Emma drove to the hardware store in town and bought batteries, along with a more powerful flashlight and some heavy-duty garbage bags. The elderly clerk, a man with weathered hands and kind eyes, asked if she was the granddaughter he'd heard was cleaning out the old Miller place. "That's me," she confirmed, counting out bills for her purchases. "Fine woman, your grandmother," he said, bagging her items. "Kept to herself mostly, especially these last few years. Hardly saw her in town at all." "She was always private," Emma agreed, though privately she wondered when exactly her grandmother had become a recluse. The last time they'd spoken, maybe 2 years ago, she'd seemed fine. Lonely perhaps, but alert and independent. "Shame about the basement flooding last spring," the clerk continued, then seemed to catch himself. "Well, I suppose that's not your concern now." Emma paused in the act of taking her change. "Flooding? Oh, just a small problem with the foundation. Water got in during the heavy rains we had in April. Your grandmother had Kowalski's crew out to pump it dry and seal things up. Probably nothing you need to worry about." But Emma was worrying about it as she drove back to the house. Her grandmother hadn't mentioned any flooding, and from what she'd seen of the basement, it looked bone dry, unless the work had been done very recently, in which case there should have been signs of recent construction or repair. Back at the house, she decided to examine the basement more thoroughly. Armed with her new flashlight and a thermos of coffee for courage, she descended the stairs again. In the bright LED beam, the basement looked less ominous than it had the night before, but somehow more mysterious. The scratches in the dirt were definitely there, and now she could see there were more of them, crisscrossing the floor in patterns that made no sense if they'd been made by animals looking for food or shelter. Some of the marks were old, filled partly with dust and debris. Others looked recent, the dirt still loose and crumbly at the edges. She examined the stone walls, looking for signs of recent water damage or repair work. The stones were old, probably original to the house, fitted together with mortar that had cracked and crumbled in places but showed no signs of recent disturbance. If there had been flooding and repair work, she couldn't see any evidence of it. It was while she was examining the wall that she noticed the sound of her footsteps was different in one area. Instead of the solid thump of packed earth, her steps produced a hollow echo. She knelt and scraped away a thin layer of loose dirt, revealing wooden planks underneath, a subfloor, or more accurately, a covered pit. Her heart began to beat faster as she cleared away more dirt, revealing the edges of what appeared to be a rectangular wooden cover, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet. The wood was old but solid, and there were metal hinges on one side. It was a door of sorts, built into the basement floor. The scratches in the dirt suddenly made sense. Something had been trying to claw its way out. She should leave. She should go back upstairs, pack her things and call her cousin or the lawyer, or someone with more authority to deal with whatever this was. But curiosity was stronger than caution, and she found herself searching for a way to open the wooden cover. There was a metal ring set into the wood, green with age but still solid. She grasped it and pulled, expecting resistance, but the cover lifted easily on its hinges. The smell that rose from the opening made her gag and stumble backward, a mixture of decay and human waste, and something else, something animal and wild. Her flashlight beam revealed a pit about 6 feet deep, with stone walls that glistened with moisture. At the bottom she could see what looked like old blankets or rags, and scattered among them, pale objects that might have been bones. But it was the ladder that made her blood run cold. A wooden ladder, crude but functional, leaning against one wall of the pit. A ladder that would allow something to climb out. She was backing away from the opening when she heard the front door slam shut upstairs. "Hello?" she called, her voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" Footsteps crossed the floor above her head, slow and deliberate. Then the kitchen door opened and closed, and she heard the distinctive squeal of the basement door. "Emma?" The voice that called down the stairs was familiar but wrong somehow. It sounded like her grandmother, but her grandmother was dead, had been dead for 3 weeks. "Grandmother," she called back, knowing it was impossible even as she said it. "Come upstairs, dear, we need to talk." Emma's hands were shaking as she played the flashlight beam toward the stairs. She could see feet at the top, wearing the same sensible brown shoes her grandmother had favored, but the feet were too pale, and there was something wrong with the way they positioned themselves, as if the person wasn't quite comfortable with the act of standing. "I'm coming, grandmother," she said, because what else could she say? She started toward the stairs, her mind racing through possibilities. Hallucination brought on by stress. A homeless person, who had been living in the house, a relative she'd forgotten about. But as she climbed the stairs, she caught sight of the thing waiting for her in the kitchen, and she knew with absolute certainty that whatever it was not her grandmother. It had her grandmother's face, or something like it, but the features were wrong in subtle ways. The eyes were too bright, too aware, the smile was too wide, stretching the corners of the mouth in directions human mouths weren't meant to go, and the smell, that same organic decay she detected in the pit below. "You've been exploring," it said in her grandmother's voice, but the intonation was off, like someone doing an imperfect impression. "I told you the basement was dangerous." Emma backed toward the front door, her hand fumbling for the knob behind her. "You're not my grandmother." "Of course I am, dear. Who else would I be? My grandmother is dead. I went to her funeral." The thing that looked like her grandmother tilted its head at an angle that was just slightly too far to be human. "Death is such a limiting concept, don't you I've been waiting for you to visit. We have so much to catch up on." Emma's fingers found the door handle, but when she turned it, nothing happened. The door wouldn't budge. "You can't leave yet," the thing said, moving closer. As it walked, Emma could see that its gait was wrong too, as if it had learned to walk by watching humans, but hadn't quite mastered the mechanics. "We haven't finished our conversation." "What are you?" Emma whispered. "I'm your grandmother, dear. I've always been your grandmother, ever since I climbed out of that pit in the basement 57 years ago." Emma's blood turned to ice. "The real grandmother? Fed me for years. She did. Brought me scraps and leftovers, kept me hidden down there like a secret shame. She was such a kind woman. It was almost a pity when I finally got strong enough to replace her." The thing smiled wider, and Emma could see that its teeth were too sharp, too numerous. "She fought, of course. They always fight at the end. But I learned so much from her in those final moments. How to move like her, how to speak like her, how to be her." Emma's mind reeled as pieces fell into place. Her grandmother's increasing reclusiveness, the way she'd always discouraged visitors, the basement that was off limits. How long had this thing been living in her grandmother's place? How long had the real woman been dead? "What happened to her?" she managed to ask. "Oh, she's still here," the thing said, gesturing toward the basement door. "Parts of her anyway. I kept the useful bit." Emma lunged for the kitchen window, but the thing moved faster than anything human should be able to move. Cold fingers that felt more like claws closed around her wrist, and she found herself being dragged toward the basement door. "You'll like it down there," the thing said in her grandmother's voice. "It's quiet, peaceful, and there's so much time to think about things." Your grandmother had 63 years to think before she finally stopped moving. Emma struggled, but the thing's grip was impossibly strong. They were at the top of the basement stairs now, and she could see the pit yawning open in the darkness below. The smell of decay rose to meet them, and she realized with horror that the pale objects at the bottom weren't just bones. They were the remains of multiple people collected over decades. "How many?" she gasped. "Oh, dozens over the years. Delivery men who got too curious, neighbors who wanted to check on dear old Mrs. Miller, social workers who insisted on home visits." The thing's voice carried a note of pride. "I've gotten very good at being human, very good at explaining why people go missing." They were halfway down the stairs when Emma remembered the matches in her pocket. She'd been using them to light the gas stove. With her free hand she fumbled for them, struck one, and flicked it toward the thing's face. It recoiled with a shriek that sounded nothing like her grandmother, and in that moment of surprise, Emma broke free. She ran back up the stairs, slammed the basement door behind her, and shoved the kitchen table against it. The thing pounded on the door from below, its voice no longer human, making sounds like an animal in pain. Emma ran for her car keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp them. Behind her the basement door splintered under repeated impact. She made it to her car just as the thing burst through the kitchen door, its grandmother disguise beginning to slip away, revealing something pale and misshapen underneath. She drove toward town with the accelerator pressed to the floor, her phone already dialing, but even as she spoke to the dispatcher, explaining as calmly as she could that there was something dangerous at her grandmother's house, she wondered if anyone would believe her. It wasn't until she was safely at the police station, giving her statement to a skeptical detective, that she remembered the hardware store clerk's comment about basement flooding. There had been no flood, but there had been something that needed to be contained, something her grandmother had been feeding and hiding for decades until it finally grew strong enough to take her place. The police found the house empty when they arrived. The basement pit was there, just as Emma had described, filled with the remains of at least 12 people spanning several decades. But the thing that had been living there was gone. They never found it, though there were reports over the following months of strange sightings around town. An elderly woman seen walking at night who disappeared when approached. Sounds of something large moving through the storm drains. Pets that went missing near the old Miller house. Emma never went back. She sold the property to the state for $1, stipulating that it be demolished. But sometimes late at night in her apartment 3 states away, she would wake to the sound of scratching from somewhere below her feet, and wonder if some things were too old and too clever to be contained by simple measures like distance and demolition. The scratching always stopped when she got up to investigate, but she knew it was still there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting patiently for its next opportunity to climb up from whatever pit it had found and resume its imperfect imitation of human life. After all, it had learned so much over the years, not just from her grandmother, but from all the others who had disappeared into that basement pit. It knew how to be patient, it knew how to wait, and it knew where Emma lived now.